I'm Hallie, and we're starting with that breaking news here in Washington. In just the last couple of minutes, we're learning a judge is signing off on the special counsel's request to dismiss his federal investigation into President-elect Donald Trump. Yet another historic moment after 4 years full of them. Remember what we're talking about here, the charges against a former president, now president-elect, that he tried to subvert the legitimate results of the 2020 election, culminating in the deadly January 6th attack on the Capitol. The first time a president has ever faced charges for what he did in office. That one, it is officially done. That's on top of the other case against him, right? The dozens of charges he faced down in Florida for allegedly mishandling classified documents, including nuclear secrets. Remember the stacked boxes at Mar-a-Lago, on a stage, on a floor, in the bathroom? No official ruling clearing that one for the axe, but it could come soon. These two cases are certainly not going to trial now or anytime in the near future or even the medium-term future. And it's clear from Jack Smith's filing, there's only one reason this is happening. One reason: Mr. Trump's re-election. Smith writes in one of the filings, quote, "The government's position on the merits of the defendant's prosecution has not changed, but the circumstances have." So now tonight, some big questions about what's next. Like, is this it? Are these cases dead, like gone for good? Will we get a more comprehensive report on what Jack Smith planned to say in court? That is still a possibility. And what does this whole thing mean for the future of the Justice Department writ large? As the president-elect has suggested, he may be looking for vengeance. In just the last couple of hours, he's declaring victory. You see it here in his Truth Social post, saying he persevered against all odds and won. We're going to get the legal breakdown from Danny Savalos in just a second, but I want to start with Ken Delaney. And Ken, there's a lot that's interesting here, right? It is the historic moment, and it is the way that Jack Smith seems to be standing by, in the January 6th case, standing by the case he built, even as he's clearly reading the writing on the wall, that no matter what he does now, this case goes away in 2 months.
That's right, Hallie. Now, Jack Smith had to do this because he's a Department of Justice employee, and he asked the Office of Legal Counsel, does the DOJ policy that a president can't be prosecuted, does that apply to a president who, before he even takes office, after he's elected? And they came back and said yes. So he had to do this. But what's clear is that Jack Smith wanted control of the way these cases ended, and he wanted to do it without prejudice, as you mentioned, because had he resigned and left these cases hanging, then the Trump Justice Department would have had control of how the cases ended, and they might have done something entirely different. They might have left a record that suggested the Justice Department wasn't standing behind these cases. But as you mentioned, Jack Smith is saying very clearly in the filing that this is all about the policy. It's not about the strength of the evidence or whether he thought he could prove these cases in court, Hallie.
I want to read more from what the president-elect is saying today, because he's calling these cases a waste of $100 million in taxpayer money. Again, baselessly here, saying that the prosecutors did the bidding of the Democratic Party, then he went after other state-level prosecutors. Again, it is not a surprise that Donald Trump is attacking Jack Smith here. He has now for months, if not longer, I mean years, really. What does happen to Jack Smith? Is he out?
Yeah, Jack Smith is going to first file a report to the Attorney General. He's required by regulation to do that. But we don't think, based on the time frame here, that this report is going to tell us much we don't already know. There's been a lot of evidence already placed in the public record. And then he's going to resign, and there's every likelihood that the Trump Justice Department will appoint a special counsel to investigate the investigators, as the first Trump administration did with John Durham, if you'll recall. And a lot of people are going to have to hire lawyers and sit for interviews. But look, Donald Trump and the Republicans have been saying for years that this investigation is weaponized and politicized, but I'm not aware of any evidence that they've put forward to suggest that or prove it. And I've been covering these investigations for 2 years. I've not seen any evidence of any political interference. Merrick Garland and the people around him have scrupulously stayed away from these cases. They've tried to do it the right way. And look, the fact is that millions of Americans don't believe that, and there's nothing you or I can do about it. But maybe if there is an investigation and ultimately no charges are filed or some findings are come forth that it was on the up and up, maybe that will change a few minds. But right now, we have not seen the evidence that supports these charges that Donald Trump is making.
Ken, you talk about the prospect of investigating the investigators, right, and what had happened previously. The difference is, come 2025, that call will be coming from inside the House. If, in fact, Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, is nominated and confirmed as the Department of Justice leader, essentially, because she has talked about publicly wanting to prosecute the prosecutors, in her words. She's backed up by, for example, at least one Republican senator saying that anybody who worked on these cases inside the Justice Department should be fired. What is the sense you're getting from those inside the DOJ about what's ahead for them come January?
People are very nervous, Hallie. They believe that there will be some sort of investigation. And even though they know that they didn't do anything illegal, every single thing they've ever written in connection with this case will be scrutinized, and it'll be painful, and it'll cost them money. They'll have to hire lawyers, although some have insurance to cover that. So they're worried. And the other thing, Hallie, is there are a lot of career prosecutors who were detailed to the Jack Smith investigation. They would like to go back to their normal jobs, but it's a real question whether anyone who worked on this investigation can survive in a Trump Justice Department. Whether they have the legal right to fire them or not, it would be really unpleasant for any of those people to be working under Pam Bondi.
Ken Delaney, and thank you very much. More to come throughout the night as we learn more. Ken, thanks. Let me bring in Danny Savalos, our legal analyst now. You heard Ken say those two sort of special words, without prejudice. That's how Smith's asking the courts to dismiss the case. So in theory, I guess that doesn't kill it forever. But in practice, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And those two words go to the heart of the theme that runs through both of these motions by Jack Smith to dismiss these cases or not pursue the appeal in the case of Florida. Without prejudice just means that, in theory, the case can be brought again. With prejudice means it's never going to be brought again. But realistically, in 4 years, there are just so many barriers, practical and legal, to actually bringing this case again that it's not likely it will ever see the light of day again. But there, as usual with Jack Smith, he says so much without actually saying it. I mean, consider his dismissal motion. It's 10 pages. It could have been one sentence. But instead, he puts in his explanation. He says, we still think this was righteous. We're still dismissing without prejudice. The symbolism there is powerful. Even though no one will ever bring it again, we want to leave it open that, in theory, as far as we're concerned, right now, today, it could be.
There's also the fact that Smith says the appeal he's filing only applies to Donald Trump. It does not apply to co-defendants Carlos de Oliveira and Walt Nauta. People may remember Walt Nauta, who was kind of this guy who was always around in Mr. Trump's inner circle there at Mar-a-Lago there. How does the case against them move forward if Donald Trump is not also being prosecuted? Is that, it's obviously possible, but practically, how does that work?
Hallie, I am so glad you brought up that little fact, because it's quietly one of the most significant pieces of symbolism.
I can't take any credit for that question. We discuss it in the newsroom and on our phone calls, and so I put it to you, our expert.
And I know that team you work with, and that all of them came up with a brilliant question. It's a brilliant point because it's a major piece of symbolism that you don't really think about at first blush. In other words, Jack Smith is saying, we're going to pursue the appeal against Trump's co-defendants. But let's get real. What's going to happen to those co-defendants as soon as Trump takes office? And by the way, that is not a live prosecution. It's in appeal. The special counsel is fighting to get that indictment reinstated because the current status is that it's dismissed. So what Jack Smith is saying is so symbolic. He's saying, essentially, for the 5 minutes that I will still be in this chair as special counsel, we plan to pursue that appeal against these two co-defendants, parentheses, that will never see the light of day either, because, of course, Donald Trump is going to get rid of that case against his co-defendants. They're like his major domos. They're people who are intensely loyal to Trump. If he's going to protect anyone, it's going to be his co-defendants, especially Waltine Nauta. So this case is going to go away, but the special counsel makes a huge statement that he would pursue the appeal to reinstate the case against the co-defendants, probably knowing that the case against the co-defendants is practically dead and gone for all purposes.
Right. Just super quickly, Danny, what about even the bigger legal question about the legality of a special counsel in the first place?
You mean this special counsel or a future special counsel investigating
a
the
future
special
counsel?
Yeah, there's always a controversy when it comes to a special counsel to investigate the special counsel. We get into the who watches the Watchmen dilemma. So, yes, Trump may run into some barriers there, but that doesn't mean he isn't going to try to do it.
Danny Savalos, thank you for being our brilliant legal mind, sifting through all of this, because these developments come in fast and furious this afternoon. Thank you, Danny.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.